Hello, this is John from Coach.Win. I'm really excited to have Suzanne with us, a leader in the training and coaching and development world. So we're excited to have her as part of our webinar and part of our webinar series. And we want to learn a little bit more about you today. So Suzanne, why don't you introduce yourself and say hello to the crowd?
Hi, John. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Excited about the conversation today and just, where leadership development and coaching is going with businesses, because it's a pretty exciting time. So as you said, John, I'm Suzanne Combs Brown. Who am I? I love that question. So I am a wife, a mom to five, and have raised adult children now, which is kind of fun. And I also led and coached in operations, risk, consumer, merchant, and led our coaching and quality team at PayPal for almost 23 years. And so I have really honed in with my business. And what I'm loving about it is how we take leadership skills from our living room to the boardroom, and that how we can develop those in terms of just our everyday life, and then how those show up in the workplace and really crossing those boundaries. So that's a little bit about me. In my spare time, I picked up some pickleball last year, and
All right.
having fun beating my husband in some of that. And then I just signed up. I have a challenge I do for myself each year where I try something new. So this year I'm going to take a photography class. So I just got signed up for that. So I'm going to dive into that a little bit, but just a little bit about me.
It's good to have some hobbies and have some fun things to do. So let's talk about your coaching philosophy. So there's, when it comes to both executives and middle people, like how do you go about when you start engaging with people on coaching? What is your style, would you say?
Yeah. So I refer to my style as a very personalized approach, and that may sound cliche, but I really believe in getting to know the person, and I can do that really quickly in terms of just my skills and in terms of my expertise in getting to know someone and building a relationship rather quickly. And then also the culture around them, whether that be the organization they're in, the business they're running. So really diving into what are their goals, what are some of their challenges, because the best leaders that I know what their strengths are, but they also know what they're not great at, and we talk about that. And then look at what is the organization's goals. What is the organization's challenges, right? Because how do the goals for them personally align then with the organization and what they're all trying to achieve together? So it's a personalized approach. I also really talk about elevating their management skills, elevating their leadership skills, and what it would take to elevate those to the next level. And tie that really to empowerment, right? So what are the things that we have control over? What are the things that we can put into place ourselves? And what are the things that we need to ask people to join us and bring about in the organization as far as peers and teams to make those happen? So it's a personalized approach that really involves elevating their current skills and then empowering them to really control what's in their control and use that in the sense of tying their personal goals and their organizational goals together.
Nice. One thing I really enjoyed when I spoke with you the first time about your style that was a little different than some of the other, I'd say, executive coaches or whatever, is you talked about kind of wanting to sit in some meetings first at the company and getting to understand the culture of that company and maybe their goals. Tell me why that's so important to you.
Yeah. So I think this definitely comes from, when I started at PayPal, we were a startup company. There was 31 employees where I'm located in Omaha, Nebraska. And there's now over 2,000 employees in Omaha and 30,000 globally for that company. So when I started, we were a startup company. So it was very much, when you say, oh, let's go talk to HR, there wasn't HR. Let's go talk to the IT department. You are the IT department.
Yeah,
Welcome home, right? So from startup to preparing for IPO, going public, to acquisitions and removing ourselves in terms of from partnerships. So all of those stages and leading people through those changes, I know the dynamics of a culture and what impact that has on individuals and the teams working in the organization. So I really, whenever possible, I like to, whether it be virtually or in person, spend some time observing one-on-one coaching sessions. What are you talking about in your one-on-ones with your leaders, with your team? I like to go to, we call them stand-ups, but small group, call them small group, team learning sessions, a staff meeting, because you really get a feel for what are the topics that are being discussed. Are we being proactive? Are we being reactive? Because I can tell that based on our agenda and the topics in discussion. What are we honing in on in terms of our coaching conversations? Is it, do we go straight to the performance metrics, or are we asking that person that's talking about, what the behaviors are that are leading to those? Do we make that tie for them? So just spending that time really observing conversations that are being had, how we're going about them, and then the team dynamics and the team setting really gives me insight then of how personal goals being set can be aligned with the organizational goals, because that all is what forms the culture, right? And so how do we fit into that, and how do we ensure that we're coaching to the right things in the right settings? So long-winded answer, but it's really important to me to see the dynamics of what's happening in those and around them, because that is then how we go into the personalization with that individual and with their teams.
Yeah, I really like that. I like that you get to know the company a little bit more than just the individual. I think it is important, depending on what situation they're living in. Rob and I, we do a lot of surveying every quarter for our companies that we work with, and 3 areas just keep coming up. So communication, accountability, and performance, right? So improving performance, getting people the most out of that. But communication, and what I find interesting is just it's got to go up and down. So in your sessions, when you're working with either I think you do some peer groups or in one-on-ones, how do you talk about communication and the importance of communication up and down in an organization as a leader or a manager?
Yeah. So this ties back to, our previous question as well. That's also a huge part of learning the culture and understanding how does communication happen. One of the things I love to ask leaders when we first meet is, how do you know what the vision of the company is? How do you know what the strategy is for the next year? How often do you hear about that? And how are your goals then aligned to that? And sometimes we know the answer, and sometimes we can't answer those questions, and that's a really telling story of where we can close communication gaps. So in terms of just coaching and how communication comes into play, it's understanding, first of all, how communication is shared on a regular basis. How consistent is it? How often is it happening? What's the format, right? There's not a one size fits all to communication, just like there's not a one size fits all to coaching. So do we have different forms of communication in terms of technology we're using, videos we're using, emails that are going out? What does that look like for that company and organization? What fits their culture and their style? And also then, how does the communication at the top level, if you will, right? So C-suite executive communication, do we know what pieces of that then is passed on to different teams? Because we can also communicate too much where it's so ineffective that no one can connect the dots in terms of how does my work now impact that. So as a leader, and this is the space I love, is the mighty middle, where we get lots of information in the mighty middle from executive and C-suite and the strategy. Now we have to know how to dissect that so that it's manageable and understanding to pass on to our teams, but it shouldn't be a replay of what was
Interesting.
to us. It should be broken down into how do we know what matters most and how do we connect the dots for them. So I don't know if I answered that question fully, but it's really important to dissect that.
I really like that, because obviously we work with often just the leadership team, and then sometimes when we do the all staff surveys every quarter, communications, like we're not communicating. Well, it might be they're communicating, but they're not communicating in a way that the mighty middle and the next level down can understand it, right? Like they're communicating big broad strokes, but the other people don't know how it fits in. So I like how you say you have to break that down. It's not the same. It's not just take the email and forward it.
No. Yeah. And sometimes that's what we call communication. Now, that comes back to quantity versus quality, right? Okay, did I forward you an email? I can check that off. But if it doesn't resonate, If it doesn't connect to, well, okay, why does this matter to me? It's honestly for nothing.
Tell me how you work with people. I mean, holding people accountable is what people say. Like when you're working with teams, working with a mighty middle, let's say they have 4, 8 people reporting to them. They're like, I just can't hold people accountable. How do you start to dissect that? Like, just give the beginning of that story of like, how do you start working with that person about like how to have, or what's causing that lack of accountability in your eyes, or what have you found in your experience?
Yeah. Accountability, it is a hot topic. And honestly, I find it at any level, but that mighty middle definitely is. I think oftentimes I'm going to kind of backtrack on this a little bit. What I see companies doing, and what is pretty common, is somebody does a really great job in their current role, so we promote them to leadership. Right? We promote within, and that's a great thing to have. You want to have that promotion within, and that sense of career pathing, right, and engagement. However, just because we do a great job at our current role doesn't translate to being a great and effective leader. And the piece of that leadership that I found that with that transition, the hardest is the accountability, because oftentimes you're going from working with peers to a peer is now reporting to you, or a peer is, a peer, but in a different sense. And you're both leaders now, right? And treading this water. So accountability, again, is a very personal approach. It's in terms of defining it. What does accountability look like for them as a leader? Because we have to right size that definition. It's also getting to, and I'm a firm believer in clear and concise communication. And if you care about people, we do that. So although we tend to avoid sometimes the accountability conversation because they're hard, but the fact is, if we care about someone, we should want to tell them what's working and what isn't working. And that's the accountability piece that comes in. And then it's also saying, okay, I'm going to be clear with you, right? And there's some things we need to get better at. And I'm also going to give you that development. I'm going to invest in you time and coaching and develop those skills so that you get more comfortable with that accountability conversation. And so there's that two facet, if you will, of what's the relationship like that you're building, so that the person you're coaching and that needs to develop in skills knows that you have their best interests at heart. And so you are going to hold them accountable because it's the right thing to do for them and for the business. And the other piece is, how do we ensure that while I'm holding you accountable, I'm investing in developing those skills? Because we moved you from this role that you were great at to be a leader. And now we need to develop you as a leader so that you have those skills that come along. So two pieces to that, but accountability is a hot topic and one that is hard for people.
But I love, that's just a fantastic line, Suzanne. If you care about somebody, you're going to give them clear and concise, feedback and directions, and you're investing in them, right? So we have to have that conversation up front with people. Like, we are going to have clear and concise communication. I'm going to tell you your strengths and your weaknesses. We're going to coach. I'm here for you. I'm here to develop it. I think people forget that there's such a nice thing of a connection. If you tell people up front that you're going to be doing it, versus just randomly every once in a while cracking down on them, it's very hard for them to adjust to that. So I really appreciate that. Obviously, we've lived through this thing called COVID and this whole idea of work from home now and people not together naturally in teams or around the old-fashioned water cooler. Mm-hmm. Tell me how that's adjusted, what you've seen, what you've noticed in your consulting now with people. Just what little tips or tricks, or how's it just adjusted your world?
The correct question is, how hasn't it?
Yeah, probably yes.
Much easier. Oh, where do we start? So, I think I'll go back to accountability. With COVID, it brought about a lot of accountability for me as an executive and career coach, and I know for others, in terms of acknowledging that virtual coaching, virtual learning is different than in person, and we should approach it differently. So I'll go back to, engaging, with a team. And we talked a little bit about that and building relationships. How do you build relationships virtually with someone that you necessarily haven't worked with or met in person. And there's definitely ways to do that. And there's ways, that you can implement, and how do you adjust to that, within your culture. Another thing is, how do you, I think hard conversations for some are much easier virtually, actually. And we got used to doing them virtually. And so now when we have to do them in person, they can be much harder, because the screen allows for a comfort level for some, and we have to think about the flip side of that. So for me as a coach, it's, again, going back to your culture. What makes sense with your culture? What are the current norms? I like to do a practice with my clients in terms of, what are some of your current culture norms? What are some of your meeting norms? And then we set some ground rules. And, one of them is, how do we have accountability conversations? How often does that happen? But it's learning some of those aspects of the virtual world and the in-person world, and really getting into that personalized approach with the company, with how their culture works, with individuals. Also, I think it's, 5 years ago, I didn't ask the question, do you want to meet virtually or in person? That wasn't in my vocabulary, right?
Yeah.
Like when we set up coffee, it was real coffee in a coffee shop. And now my question always is, do you prefer to meet virtually, or would you like to meet in person if that's available? And so it's also understanding that, there is a new normal. And even though we can be in person, we also learn that we can do many things virtually and very well. And so making sure that you're, accommodating as much as you can, and doing what's right for that company and that culture in that setting. But I do think, again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but with leaders, so often, especially these mighty middle leaders, we put them into that role, but then we need to develop them. And there's development that needs to happen for, how do I lead virtually versus how do I lead in person? How do I find out what works for each individual? And can I make some of that happen where I can get the best performance and return on investment for what my team needs, while still living within the cultural norms of the company?
So another thing about yours, you do not only individual coaching, but you put peers, and I'm sure at PayPal you put some peer groups together inside PayPal. But I believe since then you've also put in some, mighty middles from across companies, or mighty middle or executive leaders from across companies. Tell me how you enjoy that, and what the benefits of that is. That 6 to 8 people, 6 to 10 people getting together, probably virtually or in person, but where it's more people sharing. What's the benefits that you find in that?
So for me, I'm big into, what are my strengths and what are my areas of development. And for me, I use emergenetics a lot. And so I know I'm a social and conceptual thinker. So for me to get a group of 8 to 10 people in a room, and we start thinking about synergies and vision and goals, like I could spend all day, every day doing that. Like, I love how that feels, and it gives me energy. In terms of the groups, what I love the dynamic, first of all, when you bring about leaders from different companies and groups, the synergy that's created is huge in terms of just sharing. How do you go about one-on-one coaching? What does that look like for your organization? Because you're going to get 8 to 10 different answers, and pulling some of the best practices out, you start to see trends. What is working? What is really getting the results for a company? In terms of how they go about, accountability conversations, performance conversations, how they communicate at all levels. Like, just the sheer sharing of ideas is huge for the leaders in terms of bringing those forth then to their companies. And also then, how do we take that group dynamic and all the different ideas, but then really hone in on the trends? Because that's when we can go into some real, what I would call, goal setting and some accountability conversations. You can take those then on to your teams. But I love the dynamic of, whether it be small group coaching, whether it be a focus group, whether it be, a resource group that you put together within the company. I just love the aspect of the small group and what translates from there. I'm going to add one more, that the thing that also is key to the small groups is coming back. So when we leave this small group this week, and we know we're coming back in a week or two or whatever the next time, what are we coming back with? What are some of the things that we're holding ourselves accountable that we agree on actions, we agree we're going to go forth with, and we start there with the next session before we move in to the new topic, right?
Yep.
And that built-in accountability with each other, it is huge for moving organizations, forward in terms of their performance and return on investment and engagement, all those things that matter and should matter to organizations.
One other thing that we run into a lot, and I always say, as a visionary leader, or the visionary leaders of a lot of our companies, their directions are just get it done, or it's from A to Z, but they don't give any letters in between of detail, and so that not really C-suite in our business, but those other executives that are reporting to the CEO, they need more information from that CEO. Mm-hmm. They need some more levels of detail, or the CEO is asking them to, just because they're pushing and they're driving, like, I could do that, but something else is going to fall, right? Like, it's tough. Talk about how you work with people on that level to manage up a level, because it's just as important, I think, as managing down. Is you got to manage up, expectations and results. How do you start making people comfortable managing up with their boss?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go a couple of ways that and let me start with, if you have a new boss that you're reporting to or leader that you're reporting to, or if it's an existing relationship, because there's different approaches I like to use in those sense. So for leaders that are reporting to a boss, and I encourage this, and we set this up when there's a change happening and we know that there's a new leader coming on board or a new piece of the organization that's really going to change, right? Because that will bring about change. It's inevitable. And so the same conversation as a team, when we ask about norms, set ground rules, we develop a conversation with the new boss about, all right, how do you like to receive information? How much detail do you like? Do you like single bullets, or do you want a paragraph? How would you like to be kept up to date on the work that I'm doing and in the projects that I'm working on? Do you want a spreadsheet, right? So it gets into, how does my boss like to receive updates? Because we're all different, right? We all have different ways that we like to receive that, but we also all want to know and not be surprised or taken aback by a surprise that comes along. So I really encourage leaders, when you have a new boss, to have that norms and ground rules conversation. And we really script that out in terms of, what do you need to know to be the most effective for your boss? And what does your boss need from you? Because I always tell leaders, our job as a leader is to make our boss's job easier, because we're in place, we're here, and we're doing the things that are needed to make it easier. So that's how I approach it in terms of coaching and driving a conversation with a leader that has a new boss. Now, let's say that we have a leader that has an existing boss and they've noticed, different, they're not getting enough information, or they feel like they don't have the answers they need to execute and drive forward with a strategy or a project. A couple of things are, first of all, using specific examples. And we have to have, and again, this goes back to accountability. It's accountability with, you have to have a conversation with your boss to give a couple of examples. And you also have to show how, by providing the information you need, this can help you make their life easier and get them what they need, right? So when you're in that situation, it's, first of all, what are a couple examples that you have? What has happened in the last month where, if you had better or more information, you would have been able to execute differently and drive even better results? Let's use those two examples, and let's build here's what you provided me, which was helpful. Here's some additional information that would be helpful for me and how I learn, that would take me to that next level. And by doing that, I'll have to ask you less questions. I will have deadlines. Honestly, I will have deadlines that will be even faster than they were this time. And I'm then using that to teach my team how you prefer communication, because I'm doing succession planning with my team, and I want them to have this information as I'm developing their skills. So it's a twofold in that space, in the sense of, how am I going to learn more and bring examples to close some gaps that we've already done, so I can apply those to future? And then how am I sharing that with my team as I'm sharing with them and developing them, and how to close that communication gap as well. So I kind of went both ways with that, but I think it's really important because communication, so much could be avoided if we just had communications up front about what you need. I'll give you an example too, if we have time.
Yeah, sure.
I had at PayPal, I had 11 different leaders in 23 years. So a leader every 2 to 3 years. We did a little bit of changing. Yeah. I got to the point where my second one-on-one, not my first was, tell me about you. I want to learn more about you. My second one-on-one was, here's some things I've noticed, and I want to have a really open conversation about your expectations to make sure that I can meet those. So an example was a new leader I had. I noticed that she was sending emails. Like I'd wake up in the morning at 6 and there would be 3 or 4 emails from 2, 3 in the morning. And I thought, I hope she doesn't think I'm going to respond at 2 or 3 in the morning.
Right.
But the old saying, either tell people what you expect or they will assume, clicked in. And assumptions, we're human beings. We typically don't assume the best. So I didn't want to assume anything, because what if we were a global 24/7 company? Yeah. What if she was thinking I should respond at 3 in the morning? I need to know that. So we had a very candid conversation, and it was some examples that I used. And I said, I respect the fact that, maybe that's your alone time to work. And I'm not saying that's bad. Work-life balance is very personal, but are you expecting a response from me at that time? Or are you expecting that if it's an emergency, you would call me and I'll respond when I get up and start working in the morning? And she cleared that up right away. And then I didn't have to assume. I didn't have to, there wasn't a fear. There wasn't this angst. And she was clear that I wouldn't be responding at 2 or 3 in the morning. Right. So that sounds simple, but it's things like that we don't do that we could just clear up a whole lot.
Yeah. I like that my partner in Coach.Win, Rob Simon, right away, he said, this is how I like to communicate, in the sense of, because we facilitate all day. So we're in a meeting all day and maybe going to client dinners and all that stuff. He goes, if you email me and I have a 2-day session, it might take 2 days for me to get back to you. If you text me, I'll get back to you by the end of the business day. And if you call me and leave a voicemail, I'll call you back on the next break. And he just set up those ground rules right up front. And it's been great because of that, right? The ground rules of communication were set up.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're so important, and we skip past that so often, and just make some assumptions.
Yeah, one point that you made, and I really like how you said it, because it resonated with me, is, I owned my own business for a lot of years, and I'm thinking I'm giving enough detail, and I obviously was not giving enough detail, right? And so people, they didn't do well on the project per se. It didn't come the way I had envisioned. And they probably did ask me a lot of questions. I like how you said it, like, if you bring 2 examples, like, here's the information you gave me, John. In the future, if you can give me this and this, which my original reaction is, oh, they should just know it, right? They should just know it, but they don't. But then you said, it'll make me ask you less questions. That's good for me as a leader. Yeah. It'll make me do the result, get faster deadlines. That's good for me as a leader. And I'll get better results. Like, that's what's in it for me taking a little bit more moment up front to communicate. And you're teaching, and I love that fact about leading up, like, bring those 2 examples and explain what would happen if you would have given me this information up front. Yeah. All this positive stuff for you, leader. Right?
Absolutely.
It's about making the leader's job easier.
Yeah, there's an activity that I do often when there's communication challenges and we dive into certain projects. And it comes from Brene Brown, but it's called Paint Done. And so it's when you start with a project, okay, here's all of my details that I have. Here's what I'm giving you. Now, the other side of the whiteboard is, what do you need for this painting to be done exactly right? Because I'm sure I'm missing things, because I'm giving you what I think you need, but you're the only one that knows what you really need. And so there's a balance between what else do you need, and we go through that activity. And then there's a teaching of, but how do we also move forward when we don't have all the answers? Because as a mighty middle leader, we're not going to always have all the information, and we still have to move. So what do we know that we can move on and make decisions? And that comes back to the empowerment and accountability. Like, you are in this role for a reason. You do have skills that led people to believe that this was the space for you. So you can move forward with some things. So we have to also get to that conversation too, because sometimes we can think we need more information, and we're lacking some of the confidence just to say, you know what, I do know how to do this, and I can fill in some of these blanks and do some of this until I can get some more information on the things that I can't. So there's a balance there.
That's great. I like that. I like what you said there too. Just that whole idea of you don't have all the information. You still need to be moving forward on some stuff. You can't just freeze, right? You can't just freeze as a mighty middle. You have to do what you can to move forward. So
I used to ask a question to my leaders, and I'd say, "What would you do if I wasn't here?"
no, that's a good one.
And they would be like, "I do blah blah blah," and I'd say, "Sounds like you don't need me as much as you think. Go do it."
I like it. Any advice for aspiring leaders? Any people that want to be leaders, want to improve their leadership? What would you tell aspiring leaders?
Yeah, I mean, this is that age, like if my younger self could tell myself now, right? So I do think so. First of all, the whole feedback of do the job you're in really well, that still stands. Do the job you're in to the best of your ability, no matter what that job is, because those skills with development are transferable. The skills that you demonstrate if you're looking over and analyzing a spreadsheet and having to organize data and information, those are skills that will translate to leadership. So do the job that you have extremely well. The second thing I would say is think about your own development and don't expect others to invest in your development more than you're willing to. And I say that because we often expect our leader to develop us. And it would be great if all of my 11 leaders in my corporate career were invested in my development like I was. But the truth is they weren't, and that's okay. Because I have to be my own advocate. I have to be, as a leader, knowing, okay, these are the things I'm really good at already. These are the things I want to work on. I want to develop. And then ask for that development. But it doesn't have to come from your leader. It could come from webinars. It could come from a peer you work with. It can come from someone on your team. But invest that time to develop yourself and don't expect someone else to care about that more than you do, because they will follow your lead. They will follow your lead in how much that matters to you. And the third thing I would say to upcoming leaders is know your value, in the sense of you have done things all along the way to lead you to this point. Don't lose that confidence. Don't lose that empowerment. When you're comfortable and you're doing a job for a while, you go into it very confident. When you are promoted or when you move into a new role, that confidence doesn't disappear. You didn't lose those skills. You didn't lose what got you there. So walk into that room, walk into that meeting, walk into that project with that confidence that you had in that prior role, because it comes along with you. And that is really important to remember, because we can lose some of that along the way. When we're the most experienced in a room and then we become the least experienced in a room, we somehow forget those years past where we built all that, right? And so really hone in on what got you here and the confidence and the skills that you already have, because those don't disappear. They just have to be elevated. They have to be invested in to level up, right? To what you've come to.
No, that's a great point. That is a great point. I think sometimes people feel like, they're just going to step in and now I'm the newbie and I'm not going to share and I'm not going to have that confidence. That the reason you're there is because you're confidently doing something.
Absolutely.
So that's great.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate the time. I appreciate the learning. I know our audience will appreciate the time and the learning, Suzanne. How do people get a hold of you? Is LinkedIn the best way to find you, or if somebody wants to ever get a hold of you and learn more about your services and offerings, what does that look like?
Yeah. So yes, LinkedIn is a great source. You can find me Suzanne Combs Brown on LinkedIn. You can also email me. All of my information, I'm not going to list them out here, but I'm on all the socials, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, all the fun. But yeah, shoot me an email, message me through LinkedIn. I'd love to talk with anyone, partner with anyone. And I'm just looking really forward to the conversations to come forward. And I just love watching people become more of who they already are and just being a part of that. So I'm excited for it.
It is fun to watch people grow, isn't it?
It is super fun, super
That's
fun.
really good. Well, I appreciate your time today, and I'm sure all the audience will also appreciate it. Check out all of our different webinars on Coach.Win. We have lots of leaders like Suzanne out there, and we love you that you were a part of this. I appreciate your time today, Suzanne.
Thanks, John. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Coach.